Break. Coax. Coax. That's the frog chorus from Agamemnon. I'm the everyone's favorite boomer and vintage lens enthusiast, and we're going to be revisiting the SMC pentax-a zoom, constant aperture f4, 24 to 50 millimeters. I did a first light study of this lens back in around the beginning of the new year, and the temperature was extremely cold. It was like 20 degrees or something crazy like that, and I had to drive for an hour. And when I got out, whatever the temperature inside the car was, I had the heat on. It must have been warmer, and I'm walking around. This thing had to go through some thermal equilibrium where the metal was shrinking at a different rate than the glass. And I think that affected the output because I shot a lot of things wide open at f4 of like Christmas lights, and they all had funky aberrations on it, although it was very artistic. So I said, I'm going to reshoot this lens under more salubrious conditions. And here it is like 5 months later, May 2023. And I went to the park, and it was 49 degrees, which is cold for May. But it's still, 25 degrees warmer than it was in, at the beginning of the year. And then I did shoot a couple shots at f5.6. But then I did a lot of 8, 11, and 16, and some 22s. And what is the bottom dollar? Well, it's a fine lens if you stop it down a lot, without a doubt. 5.6 is usable in a pinch, 8's even better, and 11 and 16 are your sweet spots, and you could use 22, but then some diffraction effects kick in, and they soften the image. I mean, it's nowhere it's out of focus, but nowhere it's in focus. It's like that's what diffraction does. Also, I went out and I bought this lens hood. It's a very short lens hood because 24 millimeter, even on an ASPC sensor, is a wide angle. It's equivalent to a 36 millimeter on a full frame 35 millimeter camera. So, but still, it blocks that much light. And the reason this lens is from the 80s, and even if there's the slightest, teeny weeniest bit of haze in there, this will help boost contrast because the extraneous light isn't going to get in there and bounce around and cause problems. The build quality is excellent. It looks brand new. I have nothing but praise about that. The resolution is really good. Stop down. This is a nice lens. You got to use it in bright light then, or boost your ISO and adjust your shutter speed accordingly. But like I said, 16, 11, and 8 are where you want to use it almost always. And you could get away with f5.6, and in emergencies you could use f4. But it's definitely going to be not as great at f4. So that's pretty much it. Of course, I used the Canon Z50, which I think is a fantastic mirrorless camera. But that's not about this. So I went to the park, I took a bunch of pictures, and you know what? I noticed I always mostly use either 24 millimeter or 50 millimeter. I almost never use anything in between. Sometimes I went to 35, but mostly I went from 24 to 50. And I don't know why, but that's just the way it is. Now, if you have an extended object, like say some sort of rod-shaped thing or a hard edge, then it does really good. But fine detail and far away, it's a little muddied, especially at 24 millimeters. It's definitely soft at 24 millimeters. 50 millimeters, it's the best, without a doubt. It's almost as good as any normal 50 millimeter, almost. So, since there's not much else to say about this lens, except it's a Pentax K mount, and it has an A setting. So if you had a Pentax, some sort of digital camera that accepts K mount lenses, you could go into A mode or any of these modes, and you could control this the aperture through the camera. But since I have a dumb adapter into the Nikon Z50, I have to manually set the aperture. And I notice it's hard to focus. Like below f8, or 11 and 16 22, it's hard to nail the perfect focus. It just was hard to do as opposed to some other lenses. Even if I'm stopped down to f8, they snap into focus real easy. So I don't know what's up with that either. But what happens is if it's hard to focus and I think I'm at focus, I may be on the near side of the depth of field, and then things further away look soft, or I may be on the far side of depth of field, and then things look soft closer up. Or it's the usual, if I'm not perfectly perpendicular and parallel to the subject, then, one side of the frame is going to look softer than the other. Believe it or not, 50 millimeter has a shallow depth of field. Oh my God. I mean, these digital cameras, they really show that off. I've been seeing that a lot. That the depth of field, even at f8, is pretty shallow. You pretty much forced to use 11 and 16 if you want good depth of field and a bright range of focus in your photographs. So you got to keep that in mind. So there's not much else to say about this lens. So let's jump right into the picture samples. The Canon Z50, what's that? There's no such thing as a Canon Z50, just like there's no such thing as a Nikon T series of cameras. So I went to the park, and it was early in the morning, but not super early in the morning. Since it's May, if you get there 8 o'clock, the sun is pretty high up in the sky. So I was shooting at 8, 11, and 16 mostly. And, things like ferns, scenery, just so we could get an idea what this thing does. This is like SL11. Look at that corner. There's a corner. It's pretty good at f11. This is a wide angle shot, I believe, 24 millimeters. That's a corner. This may have been f8. It's still pretty good. Oh, this was at f5.6. And that's pretty decent. Of course, the shallow depth of field, you gotta expect the background to be blurry. This is 50 millimeters. This is stopped down at f16. I got my ducks in a row. Did you see my ducks were in a row there? So this is a corner, f16. Looks reasonably sharp to me. There's the, oh, they're not ducks, they're geese in a row. I got my geese in a row. Take a gander at that, huh? This is a full frame center crop, f11. This is used to flash. It's probably stopped down to f11 easy. Here's another f5.6. That's pretty decent, definitely. This is a f16 again. I had some dirt on my sensor. Oh, that's the bad thing about interchangeable digital cameras, especially these mirrorless ones. They always seem to get dust and dirt. So I always got to keep a can of dust off with me. 1/8 of a second, unintentional camera movement. So I wanted to get the water to blur, but, the Z50 doesn't have image stabilization built into it, not for still pictures anyway. So the whole picture came out slightly jiggly, but it came out artistic anyway. Now, I was shooting at like f8 right here, and look how blurry that is. I was focused like halfway down this trail, and not only were the leaves out of focus, they looked aberrated. As you can see on some other lenses, you can tell the leaves are out of focus, but they just look out of focus. They don't look aberrated. Now here's the foreground was in focus, and it looks pretty good. Here's some reeds. Now notice how the reeds look nice and sharp. They're extended objects, they're edges with hard lines, and they look really nice. Now here's the upper left corner of that same picture. The tufts look good, but the leaves look a little muddied. Here's the center. You can see it looks pretty sharp in the center, the rock and the leaves. Here's the, this is the upper right, I believe, upper right. This is the, no, I'm confused now, but the corners are pretty sharp, except at the extreme edges, and some of the corners are sharper than others. And it could be because depth of field, maybe I shouldn't have 5.6 or f8, which is pretty shallow. Here's the center. Center's sharp. It's probably f8 or f11. No problem. But look at how fuzzy this looks. So this doesn't look sharp. Now, you got to realize, this is the scary part. This is on an APS-C camera. Imagine if it was on a full frame, the corners would be even worse. So here's the center. I focus on this rock. Here's a corner, definitely blurry. But it doesn't look out of focus blurry. It looks slightly aberrated out of focus blurry. So this lens has to be at f8, 11, and 16. All right, now here's a perfect example. It's out of focus, but it doesn't look aberrated. This looks sort of out of focus. And that was near. And if you look in this upper right corner, that's far out of focus and it looked aberrated. Now here's another long exposure, an eighth of a second. And the water blurred because I wanted it to, but the rest of the field of frame stayed pretty sharp. And that's pretty tough. I was sitting down, that helped. So I was able to balance the steady the camera more. So I was getting spotty results because I was stopping down more. You stop down more, the corners get sharper. Here's these corners. See, that looks pretty blurry. The upper right-hand corner looks pretty blurry to me. I would think I was more parallel and perpendicular to this wall. And yeah, it looks better, definitely. So that's the trick. If you have a lens that has troubles, you got to keep it perpendicular and parallel to your subject, or else you got to stop it down way far. This is just a lens that needs to be shot at f8 or f16 or f11. I wouldn't use this lens for special photo shoots that need to be tack sharp. Although it performed pretty well here. These are the closest focusing, like 1.25 feet or something like that. And I stopped down to f16 or f22 to get the best depth of field. I focused on the tips of these stamens, or the pistils, I forget what they're called. So even then, the depth of field was pretty shallow. Azaleas, red and white azaleas. Of course, I got more depth of field when I use it at 24 millimeters.